For decades, our culture has bought into the doctrine of an unbridgeable gap between the scientific way of looking at the world and the Christian tradition. We are taught to see them as a dichotomy of worldviews, existing in permanent contradiction. This perceived split is a relatively recent historical construct. It was born largely from a French Enlightenment propaganda campaign, designed to frame rationalist progress as a victory over a supposedly hostile church. The actual history of the West tells a different story. The modern university emerged directly out of the monastic tradition, rooted in the belief that the natural world possessed an intrinsic logic that was both comprehensible and beneficial to study. Early pioneers like Galileo viewed their work as a theological mandate. To them, the human capacity to categorize and name the animals, the fundamental discipline of taxonomy, was a direct reflection of their creator's own mind. This philosophical baseline underpinned the work of the giants who founded modern science, men like Kepler, Newton, Maxwell, and Boyle. These men became scientific because they expected law in nature, and they expected law in nature because they believed in a lawgiver. Empiricism was born from the unprovable axiomatic assumption that a rational creator built a logical universe. Before running a single experiment, every scientist takes a massive leap of faith. They must assume, without proof, that the universe is mathematically describable and that their own minds are capable of grasping that description. Albert Einstein noted that he could not imagine a genuine scientist who lacked a profound faith in this rational intelligibility. It is the core axiom required to do science at all. This is the concept of the logos, the idea that a word-based, rational logic dictates the order of the cosmos, and that this same logic resides within the human psyche. Richard Dawkins once proposed that for any organism to survive in its environment, it must physically be a microcosm of that exact environment. An alien biologist could dissect a terrestrial bird and derive a complete model of the Earth. From its physiology, they could calculate our planet's gravitational pull, the density of our atmosphere, and the specific electromagnetic frequencies of our sun's light. If our biology acts as a microcosm of the physical Earth, our mental ability to navigate abstract mathematics suggests that our cognition performs the same function for the universe's logic. Our minds appear specifically structured to snap on to the intrinsic logos of reality. This raises a problem for the strict materialist. If there is no transcendent logic, what philosophical justification remains to trust the human brain's ability to map objective reality? Strict atheism dictates that the brain is merely the end product of a mindless, unguided, and random evolutionary process. Mathematician Dr. John Lennox often tests this worldview by asking scientists to consider the tools they use in their labs every day. He asks them, if you knew your computer was the final result of a mindless, unguided, and random process, would you trust its output? The answer is always no. Atheistic materialism actively undermines the very rationality required to conduct science. By doubting its own primary instrument, it philosophically shoots itself in the brain. There is a second axiom required for science, the belief that the honest investigation of reality is inherently good. You have to believe that the truth will set you free to even begin the work. A researcher could just as easily adopt the Frankenstein view, assuming that investigating the complexities of matter will only unleash chaos. To be a scientist, you must reject that fear in favor of a faith in human flourishing. This counters the modern myth that science is a value-neutral meat grinder, where you simply dump in raw numbers and objective truth cranks out. To find any meaning in an infinite sea of facts, a scientist must prioritize them. This prioritization is an exercise in critical thinking. Every choice point is saturated with ethical micro-decisions. The scientist must decide which data points are outliers, tilt the investigation against their own personal hopes to avoid self-delusion, and refuse to manipulate data for professional gain. Data cannot speak for itself. Organizing facts into coherent science is impossible without a prior, transcendent ethical framework guiding the eye of the observer. Even the act of thinking itself is revelatory. Scientists rarely build their hypotheses. Rather, intuitions and insights appear to them as if springing out of the void. Discovery begins with a felt lack, a humble admission of personal insufficiency, and an opening of the door to a truth that hasn't arrived yet. Pursuing that truth requires a literal sacrifice. We see this in the decades of isolation endured by Barbara McClintock. She discovered jumping genes by studying these specific color mutations in corn. To do this, she had to sacrifice almost every other potential scientific pursuit, offering up her time and focus to this one anomaly for decades. This is the maturation of the observer, the voluntary sacrifice of the self and the present moment to a future problem and the needs of others. Scientific breakthrough depends on this voluntary realignment. By offering up their ego and their time to serve a truth higher than themselves, the researcher transforms a cognitive process into a moral act. When scientific capability is decoupled from this ethical foundation, it leads toward the movement of transhumanism. This is the transhumanist temptation, the hubristic desire to abandon human limits, redefine morality as a subjective choice, and declared, "I am what I am." Without a transcendent hierarchy to dictate what is right, morality devolves into utilitarian consensus and raw power. History has already shown us what happens when a society relies entirely on consensus and power, devoid of higher moral anchor. In the former Soviet Union, the KGB ran a biological weapons program with a singular scientific goal: hybridizing Ebola and smallpox for mass distribution. From a purely materialist perspective, engineering an apocalyptic bioweapon is a perfectly valid scientific inquiry. Raw facts contain no prohibitions. Only an absolute, transcendent ethic, one that exists outside the realm of raw data, can provide the wisdom to identify such a pursuit as a Luciferian crime. Nietzsche prophesied that severing our connection to a transcendent anchor would not liberate us. It would leave us defenseless against our own untethered power. The alternative to self-deification is the voluntary acceptance of our mortality and the heavy weight of being. It is the posture of an observer who serves the light rather than themselves. The highest form of scientific truth is a conjunction, the objective logic of the physical world meeting the ethical orientation of the truthful human psyche. This combination of faith in an ordered universe and ethical rigor built the greatest intellectual institutions in history. Science is our greatest engine for mapping reality. However, without the unprovable, transcendent axioms of intelligibility and ethics, the entire enterprise collapses into nihilism and ruin.